The good news is, whether or not you know what GA4 is, whether or not you ever plan to log into Google, what we're going to be covering here will help you, will position you for growth. And so I was assuming everybody knew what GA4 was, and I was assuming they had a bad opinion towards it. So the title is GA4 Doesn't Suck as Much as You Think. For those that don't know, you don't realize how much people think it sucks. But when you do it right, it will drive the right mindset. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And you're going to hear a common refrain in everything that I talk about, and it's about asking the right questions. So just keep that in mind as we go through. Before I move forward, I do want to thank our sponsors. I think Product Camp's amazing. I've been coming to it for over 10 years, I think since '09. And I'm just amazed at what an incredible resource we have where we can come together and elevate the skills of the community together. And so I want to thank our sponsors that make this possible. So as we dive into this, let me take you a little bit back in my personal history. This was how I spent about a month of my life in 2021. And that's my wife leaning over me there. That's my wife over there in green on the side. They told her basically for a month, Craig's gonna die. They told her from day one. They actually even had her meet with hospice to plan the day they were gonna pull the plug. And she said, well, if he's gonna die, he's not gonna die alone. So she came in, she insisted on visiting. She came in every day and she'd sing to me and she'd pray over me and she'd say words of encouragement. And obviously the doctors were wrong. Yeah. If I took away one lesson from my journey, it's that, one, I wasn't asking enough questions. And two, I wasn't asking the right questions. That is my biggest lesson learned from 2021. And as I went on, my journey continued. As I mentioned this morning, I had to learn how to walk as an adult. That was interesting. But a few days before this photo was taken, I was in a situation where, again, somebody failed to ask the right questions and failed to have an action plan. The question they failed to ask was, what's Craig's oxygen level? Which normally they would put a little sensor on your finger, and when it drops below 80%, 86%, a little alarm goes off, people run in and they're like, hey, let's figure out how to get you more oxygen. Well, I almost fell out of my wheelchair when I finally said, something's wrong. They run and get somebody and they say, your oxygen's unplugged from the wall. So we were missing asking the right question, we were missing the right answer, and we were missing the action that we would take once we had the answer to that question. But fortunately, we survived that and started having to work on recovery. This is something called Camp Gladiator, which has been central to my recovery. But I've had to take ownership of answering the questions for myself. So I measure my vitals twice a day. I measure, including my oxygen levels. When I would go out to Camp Gladiator, I would have to constantly measure my oxygen level, make sure I'm staying out of a dangerous zone. Because if it gave a certain answer, that would lead to one set of actions. Different answer would lead to different actions. And I kept going, kept getting stronger. By June, I ditched both the oxygen and the wheelchair. But when I finished this run, my oxygen dropped down in the 70s. Remember, at 86, they came running in the room saying, hey, what's going on? Let's get your oxygen up. So this is just for me to be able to come through and recover. I've had to constantly ask questions to achieve the goal that I was aiming for. And this picture was taken earlier this month. I achieved 50 check-ins with Camp Gladiator. And yeah, thank you. And it's been really powerful, but getting there required me taking ownership, asking the right questions, making sure I had the answers, and taking action once I had the answers. So real quick survey, who here is measured on some performance metric that can be measured? Okay, can I get somebody give me an example? Gross volume sales. Okay, so where we're going to go, for you to be able to manage that, give us an example of 2 or 3 questions you need answered to be able to manage that metric successfully.
What's your top line funnel? What are your costs of lead? How many people you talk to in the past?
Yeah. I'm guessing those numbers aren't constant week by week. Yeah. So, all right. The other thing that I discovered in my journey is when I talked to doctors, they often didn't have answers. And as a matter of fact, when I meet with a new doctor, and I'm looking forward to the day when I can get back to having one doctor, but when I meet with a new doctor, the first thing I tell them is I say, I am not like your other patients. As a matter of fact, I'm the first one that left the ICU alive, that went on the ventilator with the Delta variant of COVID. Almost everybody died from that. That's why the doctors were so convinced I was going to die. So my body is not normal. And if you make the normal assumptions about me, you won't be able to find the right answers that are going to help drive my recovery. Show of hands, who's in the business that's exactly like every other business in their category? All right, we have 2. Chances are you shouldn't be treated like everybody else, nor should you want to be. Is your goal to be average? And it's funny, I have clients come to me all the time, they're like, Greg, that's not how it's done in our industry. And my very next question is your goal to be average? No, we wouldn't be exceptional, we wouldn't be out here. So quit acting average. And part of that is making sure that you have a framework, a growth framework, whether you're using GA4 or whatever measurement system you're using, you need questions that are uniquely tailored for you based on your understanding of your business. And then you need answers to those questions, and then you need actions, predetermined actions that will drive that. So for those that don't know, which seems to be more than I thought, Google Universal Analytics is going away July 1st. It will, or the way they put it, it will stop streaming new data. And so Google's like, hey, no worries. We will give you the default settings. There are many problems with that, including the fact that all but 2 of you said that you're not average. So the default settings won't work for you. The other thing is, GA4, Google Analytics 4, is not an upgrade to Universal Analytics. It's a different product. It behaves differently. It's configured differently. It is completely different. It is driven off of events. And this is probably the keenest insight that you can get from that is as so if we jump all the way down to the end of the answer, you've got to configure events. You must configure events. You must configure these events uniquely for you, for your business, to be able to answer the questions that you have. Otherwise, you will be like a former roommate I had. Now, before they had cell phones, they had these little things hanging on the walls, and they would ring. And if you had roommates like me, they would leave you notes like this. This is a note that's one of my roommates left me. Craig, somebody called for you. I said, do you know who it was? Nope. Do you know their phone number? Nope. Do you know when they called? Nope. Do you know what they wanted? Nope. This was the entirety of the message. And if you don't configure GA4 correctly, this is what you're going to have. You're going to be like one of my old roommates. And as you're looking at the data, you're going to be trying to pull together a story of what happened. So as you're looking at growth, you want to be able to construct the story of your user's journey. What did they do? What did they not do? Where did they stop? What got them confused? You need that story. If you don't configure events in advance, explaining that story will be like explaining a Jackson Pollock painting. I look at that. People who know and love art tell me there's a story hidden in that. I can't find it. I respect Jackson Pollock. He's impressed people that impress me, but I can't find the story. And if you go through, after the events happen and you didn't actually configure to measure those events, you're going to be trying to make sense out of something like this. And then we know what happens. You and one of your sometimes loved colleagues go to management and you both start trying to tell what happened. And they act as a judge trying to say, well, you both can't be right because you're disagreeing with each other. How do we figure out what's true? So then some say, well, I know. We're going to survey the customers. There's a company, maybe you've heard of it. It's called CocaCola. They ran a survey in the 1980s. It's a very big survey. They surveyed 200,000 people. And 200,000 people say, hey, this new formula of Coke that you have is better than the old formula. Coke said, great, it's also cheaper. Crank up production. And they did. They cranked up production. And then they started getting hate mail. This was before the internet. This was before email. These were people that were seriously pissed off. They had to go to all the trouble, figure out what Coca-Cola's mailing address was. They had to write a letter by hand, put it in an envelope, take a stamp, buy a stamp, put the stamp on the envelope, walk it down to the post office and mail it to say how upset they were with that change that was validated by 200,000 people. Now, this is out of the scope of today's presentation, but we have another presentation that will explain why user surveys will seriously hurt your business. And if we had time to go through that presentation, at the end, what I would tell you is what's more valuable is if you can watch human behavior. How people act is way more reliable data than them telling you why they made the decision they did. And it's tied to the way our brain works. It's phenomenally cool. We just don't have time to talk about it today. So that takes us back to events. If you're going to be watching human behavior, you have to be tagging events. If you're doing custom apps, you can just put it in your code to feed out events to GA4 or whatever your measurement platform is. Wherever you get your answers, you want to have these events tied. And so here's an example. This is one of the graphs that we like. I'm going to focus over here on the left-hand side. When somebody lands on one of our clients' landing pages, we want to know how many people got there, how many people engaged with the content, how many converted, and how many took the next step. If you don't have events configured, this is impossible. You will spend countless hours trying to find the answer to that. This was quick and easy. We just said, tell us how many events fired for aware. Tell us how many events fired for engaged. How many events fired for converted. And we put in a tool, we use something called DataBox, and it gave us the answers. By the way, GA4 think of it as a measurement platform. Do not think of it as a reporting platform. You can, if you want. You can also try to give a cat a bath. It doesn't end well. It's not happy. It's not fulfilling. It will leave you hating life. But when you configure it, it is an amazingly powerful tool. GA4 is a measurement platform. Yeah, it generates reports, but yeah, don't. So let me show you a framework for getting there. And before I go through this framework, let me give you an example. We were going through this with a client. They did about $6 million in revenue. And when we were going through this framework, helping them put together a strategy, we discovered that they had about $2 million of potential short-term revenue. So let's do the math. $2 million on top of their already $6 million, that would be 33% potential short-term growth. I put that in the category of significant, worth paying attention to. The answer was found nowhere in Google Analytics, nowhere in Universal Analytics. The answer was found because we were going through a process, and this is a process I'm about to show you. So as you roll out GA4, the first thing you want to do is turn it on. There's a chance Google's done that for you. I hope not, because their default configuration sucks, and it pulls crap from your Universal Analytics into that now you have to clear out. When you pull it over, one of the cool things about GA4 is it does modeling. It tries to fill in the gaps. You know, you've heard about the privacy, all the privacy going on. The number of things that you can measure in analytics is decreasing. So GA4 is doing modeling based on AI. But for some strange reason, they turn their modeling off by default. They also set the default time frame to 2 months. So you only have like 2 months of data. Those are the defaults. So that's the problem. The next thing, and this is what we've been talking about, is GA4 doesn't know how to build your model for your business. They know how to build it for an average business that covers all the industries in the world, and that's the default configuration they'll give you. Probably doesn't describe yours. If you're running Google Ads, July 1st, your ads are going to break if you don't have GA4 properly configured, because that's where Google Ads gets the data to help drive its AI to optimize your ad performance. So let's talk about how to get there. Month 1, we start on a strategy. It's called growth gears. Remember we were talking about what's the question? You know, you're responsible for growth. You gave me 3 questions. For each of those 3 questions, those questions, that's your first growth gear. They need to drive another growth gear, which is once you have the answers to those questions, what are the actions you're going to take to make sure your business grows reliably? We like it when the answers are predetermined in advance, because what typically happens is something happens, revenue's down, people come together, they argue about what happened, everybody digs into the data, come up with their own version of truth, then they argue about the solution. Month later, maybe you do something, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. When you do this in advance, the answers are already there. It's a lot easier to get the buy-in on the front end, a lot quicker to respond when you do it. Month 2, you start wireframing what your dashboards are going to look like, and you start identifying the critical infrastructure you need to pull it off. Month 3, you start implementing, which means configuring the events. And I'm talking about this in the context of GA4, but that's just part of the problem, part of your solution. We use HubSpot. It also requires that you configure a HubSpot. Whatever your CRM is, whatever your infrastructure is, you want these to work together to tell you that story of what happened, and to tell you that story in a way that you don't end up before the judge arguing your side of the case versus someone else's side of the case and disagreeing about what happened. And then months 4 through 6, you have to launch and train the AI. And I know there's at least 1 or 2 people in here that are saying, well, gee, I haven't turned on GA4 yet, and I know July 1st is coming around. That doesn't add up to 6. So yeah, the clock's running out. The sooner you get started, the better. And we have a guide that I'm going to share. That's what the card in your seats are. We have a guide that will help you do that of The card says something else. Ignore what it says, but just get your name, email, and phone number. We'll get you the guide. So let's talk again about the growth gears. What questions are you trying to answer? That's the first gear. You have to be asking the right questions. Remember, my biggest lesson learned from 2021 is I did not ask enough questions, and I didn't ask the right questions. And it nearly cost me my life. Growth gear number 2. What actions will you take once you have that information? When you have the answers to your questions, what action will it drive? Again, for me going back to 2021, if I had asked better questions, if I'd asked more questions, once I had the answers to those, I would have taken different actions that would have kept me out of the hospital. So let me give you an example from my business. What is the top organic landing page and what's its conversion rate? That's my first growth gear. Next is if the contact conversion rate is above 10%, celebrate. If it's between 5 and 10%, enhance the offer, usually an offer of a piece of content. If it's less than 5%, change the offer. So here's my predetermined actions. I actually put this to work once I had the answer to that. I was like, oh, well, crap. It was, oddly enough, a page we had on configuring Google Analytics, something we're kind of interested in. We weren't converting any traffic off that traffic. So this was our article using Google Tag Manager to set cookies and custom dimensions, has 0% conversion rate. So the second growth gear, the action was create a new piece of content to offer on that page. Actions predetermined. The piece of content, that had to be customized, but already know. The other thing is, as you're doing this configuration, you not only want to report what's happened in the past, but you also want to be able to predict what's about to happen. And especially with GA4, but I would say anything, if you understand your business, you have leading indicators that should be able to tell you what's about to come. You've told me enough. You know your leading indicators. You know if certain things aren't happening, that won't, you won't get the outcome that you want. Month 2, you start wireframing, and a wireframe looks like this. It does not look like this. This is an example of what we call a pipeline report, where we do kind of first touch all the way to money in the bank, and we break each stage into a milestone. Each milestone gets an owner. But this is a pretty report. Month 2, you're just doing the wireframes, and you're working with your team to say, hey, dear milestone owner, if you had a dashboard that looked like this conceptually, would it help you manage the milestone that you're in charge of? And if they say no, then you make adjustments. If they say yes, you're like, cool. Let's identify the infrastructure we need to be able to implement that. And then month 3, you implement. We do a lot of stuff in Google Tag Manager. But again, if you're coding your own product, this is something that should just be built into your code, where your code fires out regular events based on what's going on, and you just have to tell that block of code what event to fire out and what information to carry along in the payload. And then once you have all that, then months 4 through 6, you actually start building the dashboards while the AI trains in the background. Once you do all this, you're going to discover that your view of the world has changed. Think of it as you climbed to the top of a mountain. You thought you knew what you would see once you got to the top. You got to the top, you saw something different. And you say, hey, based on what we're seeing now, here's what we need to do. So quarterly, you just need to repeat this process. Keep repeating this process. And then once a year, you sit down and say, hey, we're going to set some goals for the next year. Here's our goals. What do we need to be able to measure to achieve those goals? And you work that into your measurement strategy. You see how this really doesn't matter? This isn't about GA4 or anything else. This is a framework for growth. And if you build it in, you'll find things. You'll find $2 million of short-term revenue for a $6 million company. Now, here's the really cool thing. When you document all this, and you put this together, you can put it in a binder. We love binders. I know that's old school, but we love binders. You can put it in a binder. You know what? You got your operations manual for your business for sustained growth. You know, people leave jobs and what have you. Got this binder. Hey, here's this milestone. Here's the inputs to the milestone. Here are the outputs. Here are the growth gears. Here are the questions that are going to be answered to help whoever's managing this milestone manage this milestone. Here are the actions to take. You could bring somebody in day one, hand them a copy of the binder, and they have a pretty good idea of what they need to do on that day. It's a framework for growth. And there is a number of people out there that are upset Universal Analytics is going away. It is what it is. I know people who are living in denial, people who have no plan to migrate. I'd say even if you believe that, you still should do this. This is a framework for growth. Let me just kind of skip through that. You know, here's the journey. But when you do that, it lets you move incredible distances. And I can tell you, I wouldn't be standing here. I definitely wouldn't be standing up talking for a half hour, because by the way, my lungs are still crap. Doctor confirmed that last week, one of my doctors. But I wouldn't be standing here. I wouldn't have the breath. I'd probably be sitting down if I didn't take ownership for my own growth and start doing the measurements I needed to be able to manage that to get me to the point where I'm standing here. So on that note, there is a card. We have a guide to help you implement this process that we talk about. Just put your name, email, phone number on that. Get that back to me. We'll get you the guide. We have a couple minutes, and I'd love to answer any questions. Yes?
I am somewhat familiar with GA4 and Universal. Can you explain why people are so upset about Universal? Like, what's good about Universal Analytics that makes them upset that we're moving away?
Well, some of it is just change, but you know, a fairly recent development in GA4 is they finally have a landing page report, and it sucks. The landing page report in Universal is better. A report that's still missing from GA4 is quick survey. Who here thinks somebody comes to your website, says, "Holy cow, I found what I've been looking for," and they convert on their first visit? Anybody living in that world? Okay. Universal Analytics has a report that will tell you, you know, for the multi-step conversions, how they came in. They came in via paid, and then organic, and then email, you know, whatever, and then they converted. GA4 doesn't have that report. Trying to just get basic reporting at all. Yeah. Yeah, it's, and that's the thing. That's why I say, I think it's a really, actually, I think it's a very, very good measurement platform. It's a horrible reporting platform. And some of the reports, like that multi-step, you know, multi-channel conversion report, I don't have an answer for that. But you know what it does? It is really cool. And it's a lot easier to do this in GA4 than it was Universal Analytics. You ever have somebody visit a page that triggers a conversion event, and then they go back and they refresh that page and it triggers another conversion event and your data's corrupt? Well, GA4, you can report user conversion rate. So you know, and that funnel that I showed you, that's all users. Because I don't care if somebody comes back to a page 10 times. I just want to know how many users are moving through that funnel. At least me, that's where I care. And so there's some really cool things. You know, it has some new measurement capability that was not available in Universal Analytics, but it doesn't have nearly the reporting capability that Universal had. Yeah.
I use something called ad block and cookie blockers and all kinds of things in my
Yep. So remember I said GA4 does modeling? So GA4, so right now we know there are things we can't measure. If you're using Universal Analytics, you know there's a certain number of people coming to your website that you can never measure. We use HubSpot. We see them come in. I've had leads come in where I know exactly where they came from. They came in from a LinkedIn post that I had because they commented on the LinkedIn post. But when they come in, it stripped out all the UTM parameters. It stripped out everything that told me about where they originated from. And so for the parts that we can't measure, GA4 rather, does modeling. And they have a number of ways of building in the models where they kind of fill in the gaps using their AI. Who here has a Nest thermostat? Anyone? Google product. Who here uses YouTube? Oh, Google product. I have a Fitbit. Anybody have a Fitbit? Google product. So Google has properties all over the web that it owns and it controls. And so it starts pulling data from these other places and starts using that to help paint the mosaic. I remember, I think this was approaching 10 years ago. I woke up one Saturday morning, it was a weekday. I woke up one morning and I'm getting dressed, getting ready for the day, and I thought, I need a haircut today. I never voiced it. I just said, I think I need a haircut. I went to a meeting. When I was leaving the meeting, I pulled out my Android phone, and it gave me directions to the barber. That's where it was 10 years ago. Where do you think it is today? Other questions? I saw some hands over here. Yes?
General question. I need analytics next week. I don't have 6 months.
So there's a Chinese proverb, best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. Go in, turn it on. Some of the AI learning, some of the configuration, you got to get started through this. Got to get started through this process. Feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to talk you through it. But you need it tomorrow. Turn it on today. Start going through this process. Unfortunately, as of yet, we cannot turn back time. If we could, I'd go back early 2021, make different decisions. Yeah.
Given that, and what you're saying before, it sounds like there's a way to turn it on with defaults where you could actually make it worse by turning it on without doing the right things beforehand.
Well, there's a good chance, there's a very high chance that Google's already made it worse for you. So the sooner you can get in there and stop Google from doing its default configurations, the better. So Google is serious about migrating people over, and I have seen in some cases where it's gone and it's created the property, it's set it up, it's imported your stuff from Universal Analytics. So the sooner you get in there, it will pop up a message saying, hey, would you like us to migrate this over? Say, no, thank you, because they're going to import a whole bunch of crap in there that you're going to have to eventually go in and clear out. But there's a good chance that you already have a GA4 property if you haven't set one up by yourself. Yeah, they're really forcing this through. And by the way, part of the reason they're doing this is, especially in Europe, they're paying hundreds of millions of dollars in fines for violating people's privacy. That's a lot of the motivation to move there. I don't get the feeling that answered your question.
I think it does to some extent, but I guess it's just a matter of, like, when you say clearing out and whatever, it seems to me that there might be more damage that could be done getting it set up wrong from the beginning than waiting and making sure you get it set up right.
Potentially. Like I said, there's a good chance if you haven't set it up, Google set one up for you. The point is, wherever you are in this journey, if you haven't started, when you walk into work Monday, you should get started on this. And you should start putting together the strategy. And by the way, if you're like me, your strategy, you'll set up something one way and you'll go in, and the further down the road you get, you're like, I think I did that wrong. I'm going to go in and undo that. And now you have a mistake that Google didn't put in there that you put in there, and then you have to just kind of wire around a workaround. It eventually goes away as the data filters out, but Yeah, you just, at some point, you just have to start configuring. I will definitively say the worst choice is doing nothing. Yes? There are a number of analytics products out there. I mean, the bottom line, if Google's not lying, July 1st, UA is going to quit streaming new data. So that's gone. That ships, There are other analytics products out there. If you have a lot of money, Adobe has a nice one. There are different solutions out there. GA4, I'm about to get yanked off the stage. GA4 is a great measurement platform. It's just not a good reporting platform. So I will wrap up there. Before somebody physically extracts me from the stage, I will move to the back or into the hallway if anybody has any additional questions. Thank you.